In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
Welcome back to another edition of the Daily Memphian's Memphis Grizzlies podcast. This is your host, Grizzlies beat writer Drew Hill, joined, as always, by columnist Chris Herrington. Chris, it was an eventful trade deadline after all. We were here in the office. We were ready to record yesterday. It's a little inside baseball. And we ended up not doing it because we were on a time crunch. So we're here the next morning, ready to go, finally. The Grizzlies beat the buzzer of the trade deadline and got something done.
Yeah, I really wish it'd been. I wish they had just not beaten the buzzer. That sort of would have been better. It's one of those things where I wasn't really. I would, from a basketball perspective, I think I would have preferred them just not doing anything to what they did, which we can talk about. But also the fact that it happened right at the buzzer is like, oh, now I had written an entire column that was ready to publish, basically the idea that they were just not doing anything, and then I just scrapped the whole thing. And so, yeah, that was not great. It's interesting, like fan base reaction and trying to gauge it, because it's not like we have like a poll in the field, right? You know, and so from people you personally interact with, from what you see in social media, you look at the comments on stories, whatever. There's a real disconnect between fans on social media, particularly Twitter X, and like if you read like the comments on stuff.
Yeah.
And you would think that the people on social media who are more like intense about it would be better informed, but it's actually gone the other way. I think people get so worked up about sort of phony rumors and exaggerated rumors that they expect this stuff to happen. And then when it doesn't, they get upset. And not to like pat myself on the back or whatever, but literally if you listen to the segment I did yesterday morning on the Jeff Calkins show, and it's on a podcast, you can go back and listen to it. I said, I think they're probably just not going to do anything. And Jeff said, okay, well, what if they did do something? What do you think they would do? And I said, well, the one thing that's out there, if they just want to get off Marcus Smart's contract, is that you could flip him to Washington for Malcolm Brogdon. You give them a pick, you get Malcolm Brogdon's expiring. Maybe they do that. And he said, well, what about Jake LaRavia? I said, yeah, he probably won't be back. Maybe you move him for a second round pick. The only thing that's different about what they did than what I said was I was wrong about the expiring contract. It wasn't Malcolm Brogdon from Washington. It was Marvin Bagley and Johnny Davis. And so while I was also sort of disappointed in their deadline, I was not remotely surprised about what they did. And yet I think there are a lot of fans who were like shocked. You should not have been shocked.
No, I agree. And to your point on the social media stuff, I would just caution that there's a lot of people out there that are looking for social media attention.
People you've never heard of, and suddenly you're sharing their trade rumors and trade reports.
There's a lot of bad information.
Yeah.
Bad information. Like the Cam Johnson thing, I'm just saying.
The Milwaukee
Cam Johnson
thing.
was never all that serious.
Right.
Like,
or any of the Cam Johnson stuff. Right.
Any of the call. Yeah. It was never, they were apart on that. Like that was just like not serious. And like people, you run with stuff that may not always be realistic, or
you want to believe things because they're exciting, and so you want to believe them, and then you get worked up that stuff is about to happen, and then it doesn't happen, and then you're disappointed. It's kind of it's not a healthy emotional cycle necessarily.
Yeah. We'll get into the trade, and I took some questions on social media, some of which are pretty good, and so we'll answer some of those today. And we'll probably just talk some Grizzlies because they've been playing well recently.
Yeah, there's basketball going on. And it's been like really good basketball.
Yeah, it has been. It has been. I think there are some things to discuss. So obviously there's there's two sides of the coin here with this trade. First of all, it was a surrender trade, right? This was a white flag trade for the Memphis Grizzlies on Marcus Smart. And it was
a week or so ago, I called it the Marcus Smart escape hatch trade. Because I thought there was a chance that that's where it was headed. And that is what that was. That was a escape hatch, eject button, white flag, whatever metaphor you want to use. I mean, that's what it was.
Yeah. And obviously it didn't work out for Marcus. I think it's totally fair if you want to question the timing of it or the decision that was made or any of that. But I think that let's try to get off on the right note here.
Yeah.
And let's talk about what it could mean that could be a positive for the Grizzlies first before we talk about, what it is. But the nature of the trade is not positive, right? The nature of the trade.
I'm going to go along with you here, but I will note we are burying the lead. But go ahead.
Right. The nature of the trade is that this is a bad thing because they messed up the Marcus Smart deal.
Whether it's a bad trade or not, it's rooted in a bad trade, right?
Right. Correct. So with that caveat,
yeah,
I think the idea of this, right, would be you got off several $1 million this season. You're going to now go into the summer with some cap space.
A little bit.
With a little bit of cap space. You are going to have some flexibility as it relates to re-signing Santi Aldama and potentially keeping Jaren Jackson Jr. here for the future. And that was immediately reported after the deal was done. Yeah. Your thoughts on that?
I believe, so as you know, I'm a nerd and I've got spreadsheets. I believe
that was a humble brag. I've got spreadsheets.
It's true. So here's the thing. I do think that this sort of cracking the door open a little bit more for a possible, quote, renegotiate and extend with Jaren Jackson Jr. I do believe that is part of the matrix of things that fed into this. I also think the message has gone out that that's what it was about, and I think people have gone with that message. And I'm telling you, having crunched the numbers, I'm more skeptical about that as an ultimate outcome. They have not done enough cap-wise to do a renegotiated extend with Jaren Jackson. There would need to be more. And that more could be like you find somebody, you pay somebody to take John Konchar's money this summer and that goes away. It could mean you renounce Santi Aldama, who, if you look at the books, you'll say, well, he's, the qualifying offer is $5 million. The cap hold is 12. That's on the books. And whatever new contract he signs is going to be bigger than that. So signing a new contract is not going to lower the cap hold. The only way that number gets lowered is if you just let him go. Or you could and by the way, I'm already baking in Luke Kennard being gone as this. So I think to get to a number big enough to do that kind of deal with Jaren, there's more work to be done. And if he makes all NBA, it doesn't matter because he's eligible for the other thing, right? So I personally believe, and I wrote a piece about this that'll go up sometime between now and Monday. I personally believe the renegotiated extended with Jaren thing is more far-fetched than people have suggested. But do I believe that was a component that they want to, what if he doesn't make all NBA? We want to try to lock him up this summer. We create a path that maybe we have to do more to clear the path, but we've cleared it a little bit. And do I believe that's part of it? I do, but I don't think that's the main thing.
Just in terms of Marcus going out here.
But to your point, there's also the Santi. I think we all know at this point they don't want to go into the tax until the new Jaren contract may force them to go into the tax. And so, I do think they want to re-sign Santi Aldama. So I think people have focused on the Jaren aspect of this. I think there's a Santi aspect of this too, in that I think this is an indicator they intend to re-sign Santi Aldama. And they want to re-sign Santi Aldama and maybe do some other stuff and try to stay under the tax next season. That's more what I get out of it. Yeah.
No. And I'm not trying to say that I think this is a great trade. That's not what I'm doing. I was just throwing out in the atmosphere.
These people,
theoretically, if you're trying to make something good of this, how do you do that?
Here's the key thing for a lot of this, and not just for the Grizzlies and not just for this front office. We like to say, these idiots when they make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. None of them are idiots. They have a rationale. Now, sometimes those rationales will be wrong. Sometimes they'll be good rationales and the moves don't work out. But it's important to think about why things happen because there are reasons why things happen. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind for all these transactions.
But there are reasons why things happen that people don't know.
That's right.
Just look at the Luka stuff, right?
Yep.
From the outside, it seems like the most absurd trade ever, but you're not in those rooms between Nico Harrison.
I think it's important. For people who are, maybe for us more than fans, and when I say us, I mean all media, not just me and you. I think it's important to start with trying to figure out the why of things before you rush to the judgment on things.
Right. In terms of Marcus Smart, he played 39 games.
In 2 seasons.
In 1.5
1.5 seasons, yeah.
It wasn't particularly great, even when he was on the court. For the Grizzlies, it was a trade that did not work out. It was still a trade that a lot of people applauded in the moment when they acquired. I'm not saying everyone.
No.
But a lot of people did applaud.
I think it's important to remember, and I'm saying this for the benefit of listeners because you know this very well. There was a basketball component to the trade they made, and maybe that was a good decision. Maybe at the time, maybe not. Maybe they misjudged where Smart was in his career. There was also, that was a particular moment in the franchise in terms of their locker room culture situation, coming out of that playoffs with the John Morant off-court stuff, with the messiness of Dylan Brooks. They were really focused on trying to stabilize their culture. And that was reflected not only in the Marcus Smart trade that happened that summer, but in the Derrick Rose signing. That was a part of that decision.
Yes. No, it absolutely was. And it didn't work out from a basketball perspective. And
it may have worked out from a culture perspective.
It may have.
Yeah.
It may have.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing about this is, like, I don't know if, like, I'm just speculating here, but, like, Marcus Smart was such a Celtic. He was such a true Celtic, and he was so beloved in that city.
It was hard for him.
It seemed so hard for him. The moment he arrived in Memphis, it just was not going to be his home. It was just not home. It just never felt like Memphis was home for Marcus Smart. And I can't blame Marcus Smart for that. I can't.
It felt like, to be glib, it felt like the rebound relationship, and then maybe the next stop you have, it's a better situation for you, It really felt like that.
So, I think that is in play here too, right?
So, I left my heart in Boston.
Yeah, exactly. And who wouldn't if you were in Marcus Smart's shoes?
Yeah, and then they win a title.
I mean, and he admitted that really stung, It was a big motivating thing for him. And so I think that there's probably an element of that in play here as well. So at its core, it's obviously we can't sit here and say, like, oh, I thought it was a good trade because it was an escape hatch trade, as you said a bunch of times.
I think the real core thing, I tried to write about this, and they're never going to say this publicly, and I don't think they're even going to say it privately. But to me, it is crystal clear in the decision to make that trade. It was not just about the financial thing. If you thought Marcus Smart was going to help you, they wouldn't have traded him. If they wanted him to play basketball above Jalen Wells and Vince Williams and Scottie Pippen, they wouldn't have traded him. That trade is an admission, not only that, like, the Marcus Smart thing wasn't working out, but they did not believe, even with his veteran experience, he was going to be better for them in playoff basketball than these young guys they have who haven't played playoff basketball. Like, that was them saying, we don't think he will help us, and we don't want him playing ahead of these guys. And if you keep Marcus Smart and he's healthy, you're not going to not play him. He's going to be in the rotation, and you're going to have, Scottie Pippen or Vince Williams or whoever sitting on the bench. And I think they made a basketball decision that our team is better, even with the inexperience, with those guys playing the Marcus Smart playing.
Yeah, and despite the fact that they've played 11-player rotations most of the season, I don't think that's what they ultimately want to do.
That's right.
And this, like, by trading Jake and by trading Marcus, this gets you closer to what you actually want to play to conclude the season. And it's time. It's time that they make that change.
The one thing that makes me wince a little bit is the trade deadline happened to come just by accident at the healthiest moment of the season for the Grizzlies. And so, yes, you traded, if you think about what you want your 9-man rotation to be in the playoffs, the guys they traded weren't in it. I think that they had made that decision. Marcus Smart was not going to be in that. Otherwise, they would have kept him. But okay, now what if you have the injuries, right? You have a little bit less depth, but only a little bit. You still got John Conchar who could actually play, who just is just not playing,
So let's come back to this because I took listener questions and right. I wanted to do that, but let's just talk some basketball real quick. And then
it seems really good.
The team's pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, like, Ja and Jaren have played 2 games together since Ja came back, and they both look really damn good, Chris.
Yes.
Like, really good. And I think it's a major development on the season that's being slightly overlooked.
I agree.
That they have found the formula for those two in these last two games.
I think there was a lot of consternation about, you had that moment. I wrote a column about like worrying about John. Maybe you can look at that now and say, ha ha ha, a week ago you're writing this and look what's happening now. I stand by that column. I think that there was a moment in the very recent past where there was some real concern, like that Knicks game. It wasn't just that they got blown out on the road, 1 out of 82. It was that the disengagement in that game, and then the injury stuff pops up again. And even before that Knicks game, people were like, Ja doesn't really look like the old Ja, and he doesn't seem like he's involved as much. And I think people overreacted, but not incorrectly reacted when they looked at that and said, yeah, this new offense is working out, but we need more Ja pick and roll stuff with Edey. We got to get those guys more involved. We got to play to their strengths more. I think that was always accurate. I was not worked up about it because I thought the team was always going to get to that point. I think that was always the plan, to work that stuff back in over the course of the season. Taylor Jenkins talked about that back in training camp. But I do believe, and this is quasi guesswork, but I do believe that moment, like coming out of that Knicks game, created a little bit more urgency to accelerate that and to get into it quicker. And Taylor Jenkins even talked about that the next day. Like before the game where Ja set out, Taylor Jenkins was asked about, so Ja, didn't look so engaged in the Knicks game, and Taylor Jenkins said, I'm paraphrasing, but he used the word jumpstart. He said, it's up to me to jumpstart Ja, to get him going. And we worked on some stuff in practice to that point. And it took a few games to see it because Ja set out the next 2 games. But I think when he's come back, that's what we've seen. I think they made a deliberate choice to let's lean in a little bit more into the Ja comfort zone pick and roll stuff, the stuff that's also going to get Zach Edey going. And let's not go away from what we've been doing, but blend it. And I think that is exactly what they need to do, is blend it. And it looks great.
Yeah, so the Ja stuff was a little bizarre. Like, he was a little detached.
Right.
I mean, it's been a long season for the guy.
That's right.
Injuries have been piling up. He wasn't necessarily, it wasn't all smooth with Ja in the new offense. I think we all can acknowledge that. But they are.
Well, and the fact that he's missed so many games and Edey's missed so many games sort of slows that down too.
Right. So as the season sort of has gone along, I think that by getting those opportunities for Ja, and getting him comfortable is obviously a major development, because you need the best version of him for this team to be the most successful. But I'm really impressed with the way that they've done it while also making sure Jaren is getting the same opportunity he was getting before.
Yep.
The shot distribution's been really good the last 2 games. It's a lot of shots for Ja and Jaren and less shots for everybody else, which is what you're going to have come playoff time.
Right.
And I mean, you mentioned the previous game, but I want to go to the Raptors game, the last game that the Grizzlies just
played. Half of that game?
The second half of that game in the third quarter, it's Ja and it's Jaren. You have Ja slice into the basket for a layup. Then you've got Jaren powering into the lane and going to the free throw line after a foul. Then you've got the brilliant Ja touchdown pass down the court to Jalen Wells. Then you got Jaren coming back on the other end for an and one. Like, that is the formula. And it's not just necessarily take turns, but it's like when you have those matchups, and you get a chance to sort of take advantage of both of those 2 players all in once, especially when they're in the court, on the court together. Like, that to me was just, it changed the entire course of the game. And that's exactly what you want from this team moving forward. I think it's a huge development.
I agree.
You need that formula, and they seem to have found it. They have a good feel.
It was an it's all happening kind of moment, right? With the exception of Desmond Bane, but Desmond Bane's going to pop right in. Desmond Bane's been great. This team is young, but Ja Morant, Jaren Jackson, and Desmond Bane are going to be going into their 4th playoffs. I think it's go time for those guys. The question, and this cycles back to the trade and, the Smart not working out and not doing something else. The question is the supporting cast. It's not that I'm not concerned about the stars being young anymore. I think they're not, and they've had playoff experience. The question is, the supporting cast is unproven. And like, where are they going to be ready for this when he gets there? That's the question.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, we had Vince Williams Jr. came back in that Toronto game as well.
Yeah.
Why are you smiling at me?
I'm going to try not to like say crazy things on the podcast. I'll just say I think
you are just the biggest Vince Williams Jr.
I'll just
guy.
say I think he has a chance to be extremely important for this team by the time we get to the playoffs.
Are you doing that because I said you slightly overreacted? Is that why you're smiling?
Yeah. We'll see. We'll see where it goes. It's one game.
I do think he's very good, and he had good moments in that Raptors game, and he's going to be meaningful for this team in the playoffs now for certain.
Well, it's one game, but what I was looking for when he came back on the floor, because it's the second time this season he's come back from injury, right? I was looking for the quickness, the second jump, the quickness to the ball, that stuff, because that wasn't really there when he came back earlier this season. He didn't look like that. And so I was looking for, okay, this is what he looked like last season. Is he going to look like that? And maybe it'll take him a few games to look like that. And he looked like that immediately. And I was excited to see that, because that is not what he looked like earlier this season when he came back from injury.
In terms of the other guys that haven't been in the playoffs, like obviously the rookies, Zach Edey is finding a little bit of a groove at this point. And one thing I want to bring up was, do you remember when you were bringing up the Kendrick Perkins thing about get him some touches early in the game? It might get him a little bit more engaged.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this as I was watching the Raptors game, and I was really thinking about some of the best Edey games over the course of the season. And for me, I just think that it's almost not like it's the offense that gets Zach going. Like by getting him in the flow of the game by setting some screens for Ja and getting a few rebounds or cleanup duty opportunities after Ja. Like that has been the trigger for Zach, almost more than just throw him the ball in the post and let him go turn and shoot. And so I really like what they've done with him. And so I think that it works one and the same. By doing this more for Ja, it's also helping Zach. And, he had that rough stretch and now he's playing really well again. And he could make this Rookie of the Year thing interesting if he keeps playing this way with the double-digit rebounds and the double-doubles. So
I think
been a good run for him.
I think all that's really good points. Because if you go back to Summer League, I mean, the first time he played in Summer League against Utah, he was like setting screens like 25 feet out, and guards were exploding off of those screens. We're like, oh, this is going to be great when Ja Morant's doing it. And it's taken us half a season to start seeing it more, and now we're starting to see it. But to your point, it's not just about him scoring. It is about just having him be involved in a way on the impacting the game and involved in the game beyond just trying to figure out where I'm supposed to be standing right now when things are happening that I'm not involved in, Mm-hmm. You want him to be effective when he's not involved, but maybe that starts with getting him involved, right?
Yeah. And then Jalen Wells, like where are we with the trust level of Jalen Wells right now?
He just keeps doing it, and like playoffs are different. So I don't know if there's anything. I don't think there's anything that can happen in the regular season that would make you certain about playoffs because it's different. But I don't know what more he needs to do in the regular season.
He's not a normal rookie.
It's not.
He's so mature. He's very cool-headed. Like it's just different. It's different.
And I think the Edey thing there's more of a range with the Edey stuff just because he's such a singular kind of player.
He's more unique.
Yeah. I think there could be, even if Edey's playing well, there could be playoff matchups or situations where, you're just leaning into Santi Aldama, Brandon Clark, and it's not really a commentary on Edey, it's just the situation. There's not going to be, especially now that they pulled the plug on Marcus Smart, there will not be a playoff situation where they don't need Jalen Wells, period.
I would say it's a good sign in the built for it category that Jalen Wells didn't even wait to start doing this. Like this has been Jalen Wells since the beginning of the season. This hasn't been a slow build to this version of Jalen Wells. You've gotten this Jalen Wells all season long.
Right.
And signals a little bit he might be built for it. Yeah. I think that's definitely an encouraging sign. All right, well let's answer some questions from the crazy internet. But first, let's take a break for a message from our sponsor.
Want to make a big impact without getting lost in a big system? Join youth villages to be a force for families while becoming part of one. Help make positive changes on a national scale, one community at a time. It takes a family to transform lives. Start with yours. Apply now at youthvillages.org/careers.
Okay, Chris. There's obviously going to be a lot of trade questions in here, so I didn't want to get too much into it off the top of the show. Let's start with this is probably the number one question. Why do this now? Why now? Why not wait until the summer? Is there a good answer to that question?
Well, I think there's two answers to that question. One, because they accomplished, if you want to grant them accomplishment, they accomplished two things here. One was to disappear Smart's contract this summer. So if you stipulate that's what you want to do that now means just to trade him to somewhere for expiring contracts, and the expiring contracts disappear. To do it this summer after the league calendar flips means you have to trade him into cap space. Not that many teams have cap space. So there were more options now to make the contract disappear than there would be this summer. There's no guarantee you could make that happen this summer on a contract that big. Now, the second accomplishment, and this is me reading into it, but this is the focus of what I wrote about it. It may sound bad, but I think it's true. It was sort of addition by subtraction because they decided we're better off playing these other guys than Marcus Smart. But if we keep Marcus Smart, we have to play Marcus Smart. I think that was the other part of it. If you wait till the summer, like you're playing him, and whether rightly or wrongly, I think they decided we're better off playing Jalen Wells and Vince Williams and Scottie Pippen.
Yeah.
That's my answer.
There are some questions because I saw that there was a Reddit thread that got posted around on X yesterday. There are some questions about how, and I know you said you have your doubts about if this can even happen, how it works with Jaren potentially being able to extend him off his current salary now and then get him to something if he doesn't make All-NBA.
So there's two things there. And again, I have a whole column about this that'll come out in the next few days. They will not extend him off of his current salary. The idea of the renegotiate, because it's too low. The idea of the renegotiated and extend is that you renegotiate the current salary and bring his salary next season up immedately, and then you can extend it off of that new salary. That's the idea. So Jaren's set to make $23.4 million next season. And I'm trying to remember the numbers. I've done all the math. It's on my laptop. I'm not going to open it up. I think an extension off that salary currently, maximum extension off the current salary would be like 4 years, 140 something million. Well, his regular max, not even the super max, a regular max, which will be there for him in 2026, is like $300 million. He's not signing that extension. So, but if you renegotiate and extend, and suddenly instead of like, let's say you give him a raise let's say you open up $7 million in cap space. Right now, that's about what it is. So if you gave all of that to Jaren and just changed his contract, and now he's making $30 million next season instead of 23, and now you're doing an extension off of that salary, roughly speaking, it would be like a 4-year, $180 million. Would he sign that? I don't know if he would, because I think at minimum he's looking at $300 million in 2026. This is why I'm skeptical on that.
Yeah. Well, I think that,
but that's how it works.
If it were to work out that way,
you can give him a higher salary next season and do an extension off that.
I mean, if it were in a scenario where it works out that way, you're very happy that you did the deal. Like if he doesn't make All-NBA and then you are able to do this renegotiate and then extend. Yeah, I think you'd be happy about it.
I do think part of this was they partially cleared a path to do that, but it would take more clearing beyond this.
I mean, ideally, you don't want Jaren to get to free agency at all if you can avoid it, right?
That's right.
Because and the Grizzlies, no matter what, will be able to offer Jaren more money than any other team. Yeah. But, once you hit free agency, everyone's calling. And he's Jaren Jackson Jr., right? So, if you can avoid that, I think if you're the Grizzlies, you want to avoid that. He's been the best player on your team. Okay. Operating with hindsight, this is your friend Chase here. Operating with hindsight on how the trade deadline played out, would you, as the Grizzlies, have done anything different related to the Dorian Finney-Smith deal in terms of making concessions, not requiring a second-round pick back, etc., to get it across the line?
I think there's a real question in retrospect whether that trade would have made the Grizzlies better, given that the way Luke Kennard's played lately. I think that's not clear. It would have made them better. So I don't know. Like if the Grizzlies believe that would have made them better, should they have pushed in more to make that trade happen? Then yeah, I would say yes. But I don't know what you think. I don't know if it's crystal clear that would make them better. Maybe. What I wanted the Grizzlies to do, and I wrote this, and as far as I know, they did not try to do this. And even if they had, it may not have been successful. But what I wanted them to do was, once Andrew Wiggins shook loose from Golden State in that Jimmy Butler trade, I wanted them to call up Miami and say, yeah, you like Wiggins, but you're trying to clear space, so we'll give you Marcus Smart and a first round pick, or maybe even 2 for Wiggins. That's what I think. That's what I would like to have seen them do. So I don't know about the Finney-Smith thing. What do you think?
You know what I wanted? You know what I wanted. I wanted them to bring slow-mo back. That's what I wanted.
Well, I don't think that would have.
But it would have been fun.
I do think, by the way, that
it would have been useful.
I do think, and I can't report this 100%, but I think the context clues are there that I feel like this is accurate. I do think they tried to do the same trade they did with Washington. I think they tried to do it the day before to Chicago for Lonzo Ball. And I think that actually would have been a good move because I think Ball would have helped them.
Yeah, I'm surprised Chicago wouldn't make that deal,
They got an extension for half the money, and they must they
apparently
like
really
what they see
believe
too.
in him. He's got an injury history,
right.
That was a little bit surprising. But
part of the Dorian Finney-Smith thing to a degree is like, do you believe in Gigi Jackson? And I'm sort of in the short term, I'm a little on the fence on that one, unlike a lot of fans, because that's who you're displacing. And I think they probably would be better in a playoff context with Finney-Smith than Gigi. Because that's really the minutes that's where minutes would come from. But what replaces the Kennard minutes at that point, right? Are you keeping Marcus Smart, relying on Marcus Smart to handle the ball in the playoffs?
Yeah, well, one thing that shouldn't go unnoticed is like Kennard, as to your point, has been pretty good as of late. He didn't shoot the ball well in the last 2 games, but I think his skill set.
He's playing better right now on nights where he's not shooting well than he ever has before.
Correct. His skill set turned out to be more useful for the team this regular season than Dorian Finney-Smith's skill set would have been useful.
That may be different in the playoffs because of the defense.
Right. But I do think that that's a good question. And if you change the team up that way, listen, I think having Luke in the playoffs is pretty important too because you need reliable shooters, and he's a shooter that I do trust in the playoffs.
That was part of the reason they traded for him. It hasn't really been put to the test. Maybe it's about to.
Yeah. So there's a lot of questions about the front office's ability to trade.
So I responded to someone on this. Someone asked me if any of their trades worked out. And here's my first of all, some of their draft stuff is technically trades, and that stuff has worked out. Like Desmond Bane was technically a trade, Santi, Brandon Clark, but that's not what they mean. So in terms of trading for like veteran players, I think it's mostly not been good. And the Marcus Smart thing was bad. The Justice Winslow thing was bad. I think the Kennard thing was fine. They traded Danny Green's expiring and a few second-round picks for Luke Kennard. I think that worked out. That was a positive trade. And I think people look back on it with regret because they blew the pick on Zaire Williams. But the veteran component of that trade, deciding we can flip Jonas Valanciunas for Steven Adams and that'll work out for us, they were right about that. So I think it's very much a mixed record on the trades, but the 2 sort of biggest ones did not work out, definitely.
Yeah, yes, 100%. The big ones did not work out. And this is also like I saw stuff like lack of respect for our front office and whatever. They're not aggressive enough. They've been pretty dang aggressive. If we remember the Mikal Bridges sweepstakes, like they offered a ton of picks.
Yeah.
Like the Grizzlies have a good team. Their first round picks are not good, and they're going to be the Grizzlies. It looks like as long as they got these guys are going to be good for a long time. So that's just the truth. I don't necessarily think that they're not, quote, not aggressive enough. I think they offer, might be instances in which that was the case, but it doesn't mean that they haven't explored the avenues to upgrade the roster.
They have made aggressive offers, and you can say this is right or wrong, but they have not made desperate offers, like they've shown there's been a limit because they believe in sort of what they have. And I think they believe in like the sustainability of what they have. And there hasn't been a throw everything in to be good right now, and we don't care about what's going to happen in 2 years, which is like the way some of these teams, like Phoenix or some of these teams, operate. I'm not big on it. It was funny. Should we talk about the Kevin Durant stuff for a second?
Yeah, we can.
So I haven't read the story yet. My friend John Krasinski, who lives in the Twin Cities, wrote a story about how the Wolves attempted to trade for Kevin Durant this week. A valiant effort that failed, right? Well, Bob Meyer said on ESPN, the Grizzlies tried to trade for Kevin Durant. I'm guessing half the league tried to trade for Kevin Durant, and I'm just not interested in giving a lot of credit for that necessarily. I think the Durant thing is interesting, and this is strictly educated guesswork, but I think it's interesting. So I just want to go down the rabbit hole just briefly. Here's what I think happened. I think that the Phoenix Suns really wanted Jimmy Butler for some reason. And they wanted to get Butler and give him a long-term extension. And even though Kevin Durant's better, Kevin Durant's got a year and a half left on his contract, and they were going to give Jimmy Butler a 3-year extension or whatever. And so first they wanted to trade for Jimmy Butler with Bradley Beal and add him to Kevin Durant and Devin Booker. That's what they wanted to do. And then when that wasn't going to be possible, I think they were willing to trade Kevin Durant to get Jimmy Butler, because you would get extra draft picks with Butler and get Butler for longer. And I think they wanted to do that. And I think they were going to trade Kevin Durant to Golden State in a 3-team deal, and they were going to get Jimmy Butler, and Phoenix was going to do that trade. I think it got far enough along that Kevin Durant was informed about it and said, you know what? I don't want to go back to Golden State. At this point, this is stuff that's been reported. He said, I don't want to go back to Golden State, and that's what killed the deal. But I think the whole league knew that was about to happen if Kevin Durant would have let it happen. And the league said, wait a minute, they might be willing to trade Kevin Durant. And at that point, we know Minnesota and we know Memphis because they've both been reported. I bet there was at least half a dozen other teams that picked up the phone and said, hey, you want to trade Kevin Durant? We'll make you an offer for Kevin Durant. But they weren't going to trade Kevin Durant unless they could have done it for Jimmy Butler. So just a little rabbit hole thing. Did the Grizzlies make an offer for Kevin Durant, as Bob Meyer said on ESPN? Yeah, I think they did. Is that a serious thing? No, I don't think it is.
On the second round picks, there's a lot of questions about what the first second round pick is, the Washington second round pick. Do we know exactly which one that is?
It's a convoluted, I think this has been reported. It's a convoluted, highly protected thing. I would just cut to the chase of it all and say it's going to be a pick probably in the mid to late 40s.
Right. Which they've had success with.
Yeah, no, that's a real pick.
Depending on who you ask, that could be a good thing.
So in terms of this draft, I think they basically was a trade down. Their own pick is going to be 26 or whatever, and the pick they're going to get is going to be, I'm making up numbers, 47. And so it was a 20 pick trade down to get off Marcus Smart's money. That's basically what happened. And they got the second pick basically for LaRavia.
Do you think that this trade is more about clarifying the rotation or worry about Jaren Jackson Jr.'s future contract? And does this trade officially open up the starting 3 for Vince by the playoffs?
I've been answering these. Why don't you start answering and I'll react?
I think maybe it's neither on the first. Maybe this is more so, maybe clarifying the rotation, I guess. Because like you said, it's great. I think that's the pie in the sky scenario, right? Is that this opens up the door for you to get Jaren to be a Memphis Grizzly for much longer. That would be wonderful. But I also think that they don't want to play 11 guys. They have not wanted to play 11 guys.
If they still believed Marcus Smart would help them more, even in playoff basketball, than Jalen Wells, Vince Williams, they would not have made this trade. They would not have said, man, Marcus Smart can help us in the playoffs, but we need to clear money for Jaren next summer, so let's do the trade anyway. So that's my answer, right? It starts with not believing in Marcus Smart. Because if they believe in Marcus Smart, they don't make the trade.
And Vince starting 3, I know you will probably say yes. I'm going to say no. Jalen was a better shooter. He just brings something else to your team.
Yeah, there's 2 things. One, Jalen Wells has been doing this all season, game after game. Vince Williams just came back. So I would entertain that change, but I wouldn't entertain it for a while. Ask me again in a month is what I would say. But even if Vince looks like Vince, I'm not going to believe in his shooting more than I believe in Jalen Wells shooting. And so I'm going to say I don't know about that. Ask me again in a month or two.
I like Vince out on the court when Jaren isn't, because it gives you an element of defensive chaos that you otherwise didn't have. Right. So I don't hate the idea of bringing Vince off the bench.
Right.
Chances of re-signing Bagley, and do you see him looking good running with John JJJ? That's the other thing we haven't discussed yet. There's going to be a lot of questions about buyout guys and stuff.
Right.
I mean, like I'm not particularly excited about that. I would be pretty surprised if Johnny Davis isn't waived. I think.
I think Bagley is much more likely to make it to the end of the season as a member of Memphis Grizzlies than Johnny Davis. I think Bagley will. I'll put it this way: I think Bagley will be on the Memphis Grizzlies roster through the end of the season. I'm not certain Johnny Davis will at all. The reality is these guys weren't helping the worst team in the league, and so I think Bagley will be on the roster. I doubt he'll play much or be much of a factor. I think one thing to keep in mind here is that you go into the summer, you still have quote unquote bird rights on these guys. And I don't think they're going to re-sign Marvin Bagley, but it's sort of there if they need a contract to do a trade. They could just instead of having Marcus Smart, who you owe money to, you could trade. Here's a guy you don't owe money to, but if the right trade pops up, you could give him a phantom contract where you pay him 1 year and the next 2 years are non-guaranteed, and then you trade him. And so you can sort of create a trade chip that way. Or if you don't need it for that, you just let him go. I doubt there's much of a basketball factor with Bagley.
There are some questions, Chris, about buyouts and who that might end up. If that's a possibility that they could still do. Do you think that's a possibility?
The history of the buyout market is not great. I mean, Ben Udry once upon a time was a buyout guy, and then he helped the Grizzlies during the playoff era. History of the buyout market is not great. Guys are getting bought out for reasons, Bruce Brown was someone who I would have been excited to get on a buyout for the Grizzlies, but it sounds like he's not going to get bought out. He got traded to New Orleans. It sounds like they'll keep him there. Ben Simmons is getting bought out, but there's already reporting that he's going to talk to either Cleveland or the Clippers. I don't have high hopes for a buyout guy, but I do think there'll be someone out there who would probably help them more than Johnny Davis,
I guess if you were to evaluate sort of where the Grizzlies are now, is there anything that you think, in what areas are they lacking as they enter the playoffs? I know we know that they don't have the experience, and there's a lot of questions about double down on youth, triple down on youth, and here we are, we're doing it again. Are we making the same mistake again? I guess just where do you stand on that? We've talked about it a little bit, though.
I think experience is an issue, and I think size is an issue on the perimeter. I mean, Jalen Wells and Vince Williams are both sort of undersized for small forwards a little bit, and they're young, and so it's a combo. Marcus Smart was not going to help you on the size. He would help you in the experience, but not if he wasn't good enough to help you as a player. And so that was the thing. So I think those are real issues that they have not addressed, and those issues may come back and bite them in playoff basketball.
Do you think the Grizzlies will ever go into the tax?
I haven't gamed out the cap rise with if Jaren actually does get a full supermax, I feel like the Jaren contract will push them into the tax. I have not done the math to say definitively that's what will happen and there's no way to avoid it, but just my hunch is that will push them there. And I think that's part of what's happening. I think that's part of the reluctance to go into the tax now, because as part of the new CBA, there's something called a repeater tax, right? So if you're in the tax multiple seasons in a row, there's more penalties. And I think if they think that the next Jaren contract is going to push them there, let's avoid it until that point, right? To not begin these processes. And I would point out that, who else is not in the tax this season? The Oklahoma City Thunder, the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Houston Rockets. And I think for the Thunder in particular, I think they're making the same calculation as the Grizzlies. They're just a couple years behind it. They're saying we have Shea on a huge contract. We're about to have Chet Holmgren at some point on a huge contract and Jalen Williams. So we have 3 guys who at some point are all going to be on max contracts. And just like the Grizzlies will with Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson. And that when we reach the point where all 3 are on maxes, we're probably going to be in the tax. So let's avoid it until we get to that point. That's my guess of what the Grizzlies are thinking. And I think it's the same thing Oklahoma City is thinking.
Yeah, we will talk to Grizzlies general manager Zach Kleiman later today. So it'll be interesting to see what he has to say. What are you most looking forward to asking about, Chris?
I just don't have I feel like when it comes to this kind of stuff, I tend to hold back on some of that because I feel like I understand it. And I feel like what I've written is more blunt and true than what they're going to be able to say publicly. So I don't think I'm going to learn anything. I think it'll be interesting to see what, they're willing to say and not willing to say publicly. But I feel like I on this kind of stuff, I always feel like the real truth I'm able to write in a way that they're not going to say. And I don't think there's things I don't understand.
Well, you should.
I don't know how that comes across, but that's just reality.
Yeah, you should go read Chris's column. I thought he did a very nice job of summing it up yesterday after the fact. Fair, very fair, and gives you sort of the details on why the Grizzlies might do something like this.
Right.
What do you think, if anything, we are going to hear then in that sense?
I think they're going to be complimentary of Marcus Smart. They are not going to say, we don't think he could help us. So, but they also can't say we just wanted to get off the money. So I don't know. It's a weird thing to finesse, right? Publicly, if you're a PR person, like you don't say like, we thought Marcus Smart was great, but we wanted to cut salary. You can't say that, but you also can't say this guy, man, he can't play anymore. So how do you finesse it? It's a PR matter, right? I think you lean into, we really believe in Jalen Wells and Vince Williams, and we wanted to clear the path for those guys to play. And at the same time, this gives us some flexibility to do interesting things in the summer. I guess that's how you finesse it.
Well, there you go. You might have a PR career one day when you're done writing columns. We appreciate you listening. Always take a look at all the other Daily Memphian podcasts, the Tigers podcast, the Food Pod. And go read Chris and I's stuff over at the Daily Memphian. I had a big series on Jaren, which we didn't even get to.
We didn't even talk about this so much
today.
We should get back into that next week.
We'll do it next week.
On the eve of Jaren being an all-star, we can get more into Jaren.
Yeah, and so that was really fun to write. So you can go read that. That's your homework. Go read that and prepare. We'll talk about that next week when we come back. For Drew and for Chris, we're out of here.